everyone, welcome back to United Acres. My name is Tony. In today's video we are going to be talking about vermicomposting, using worms to compost kitchen scraps. We have our package of red Wriggler worms, the Cadillac of worms from Uncle Jim's farm, and we've got our vermicomposting system that just arrived. We got this on Amazon. I'll put the link down below in the description. So let's get into it. So, this is the guide from our worm factory. They provided a nice little booklet. It tells you how to assemble it and everything that is included. I went with the Worm Factory 360, this particular package, because it came with everything that you need to get started except for the worms, which we had to purchase separately. So it comes with coconut coir, pumice, shredded paper, and rock dust, and those are all great additives to put in there with your worms when you first get them, to get them some food and bedding. So we are going to set this to the side and pull out our components so we can start prepping the bedding. This is the worm ladder. This is the top for it, which is pretty cool. It's got these instructions and tips right here on the lid. This goes on the very top. And I love the lid design. It has this dome type shape to increase airflow. Also, very important when using worms to compost. The great thing about this bin is that it can be used indoor or outdoor because it has that great airflow, great circulation. It keeps the odor down. This is the bottom tray with a hole right here for the spigot. This system, another reason I picked this one is because it does come with a spigot on it so that we can harvest the compost tea from the worms straight out of the system. Put that down. All right, get into the good stuff. So here are all of our components. There's the rock dust, some shredded paper, cocoa coir, and pumice. Great. Also has a temperature gauge so that we can make sure we're at the right temperature. You want to keep the worms between between 40 and 80 degrees. Scraper. And there's our spigot that we will put on as well. This tray is a collection tray to capture the compost tea from the bottom. And lastly, we've got our 4 trays. So as you see on the bottom, there's this grid type pattern on the bottom so that the worms are able to migrate up from the bottom into the next tray. We're just going to start out with one tray, and as the worms break down the kitchen scraps and everything, then we can stack and put the additional trays on top to give them more room to move into. And once the bottom is completely decomposed and turned into compost, we can take that out, harvest it, and put that empty tray back on top of the system, which is perfect. So now what we're going to do is start preparing the bedding and get it into this bottom tray where we're going to put the worms. Alrighty, so here's our setup for preparing the bedding and the initial mixture for the worms. The booklet that comes with the packet actually goes through these steps of how to prepare the bedding, how to start your first feeding tray. So I'm going to use this small bottom gardening tray to get everything ready. This is the cocoa coir. They had advertised that it would be a brick of cocoa coir, which would have meant that I needed to rehydrate it. But since I don't need to rehydrate it, I'm just going to go ahead and put this inside. And we're going to use half the bag when getting started. We'll save the other half for when we add the second tray. So that's about half. Now we're going to take the shredded paper and we're going to do the exact same thing. And all of this will break down. The worms will break it down nicely once they get in here. A lot of people don't realize that worms, they eat pretty much anything. There's very few things that you cannot put in a worm bin. And we'll go over a couple of those things later when we start talking about the compost. For the rock dust, we're just going to do about 1 to 2 tablespoons of this. Just kind of eyeballing it. For the pumice, we're going to do the same thing, about half the bag. This is like a mini cultivator that came with the kit. Just want to mix that up. Next, what we're going to add is water. So like I mentioned, the cocoa coir was already broken up, so we didn't need to rehydrate it. But we do need to wet this bedding because the worms, they are dry. They have been shipped over the last few days to us, and they are small because they are dehydrated at this point. So I'm going to give this a good wetting down just so that they have a nice moist environment to rehydrate. Give them a nice slurry. So I'm going to set this tray to the side and get our bottom together that's going to be holding all of our trays. So like I mentioned, there's a spigot that goes here in the center of this tray, and we want to go ahead and get that installed before we set up the trays. So we'll turn that end off. We're just going to press this on and screw it in place. This back end here. It is advised that you leave the spigot open to allow for additional airflow, but you don't have to, but it is recommended to leave it open. The good thing about this system is that it does come with a collection tray that you can store underneath the system so that it can always capture the compost that's coming out. So that's in the off position, and this would be on or open. Okay, so the lid of the system is designed to be a tray for you to use when you're harvesting or setting up new trays. So we're just going to flip that over and set this tray inside so that we can get it all set up. First thing that we want to lay down is newsprint or some sort of paper as the bottom layer, and this just makes it so that the worms are not going to fall straight through the bottom. So we're going to put this down in here. So like I mentioned, the worms are dehydrated. They've not had any food or water probably for several days. So they're very small, they're very thin, and they could easily fit through these holes that are in the bottom of this mesh tray. So we're going to put this newspaper in here to just kind of prevent that from happening. We'll put this brown paper in here to prevent that from happening. Make sure that gets good coverage all throughout the corners. Now we're going to take our mixture with the shredded paper, the rock dust, cocoa coir, and pumice, and we're going to get this in here too. And this you want to spread evenly throughout the system. And we are letting the excess water drain down into the tray, and I'll just collect that later. So it's all right that there's a bit of excess right now. We're just gonna let that drain on out. We have a kitchen composting bin that we generally take outside. It just has food scraps. There's no citrus or anything like that in here, just peppers, eggshells, veggies, that kind of stuff. So we're gonna shake that in here too. Now we are going to get our worms out of our package and add them to the system. And there's one little guy just hanging out on the outside. I had opened it when it came, and we always get our worms from Uncle Jim's Worm Farm, and because the worms are so thin, you can kind of see one right there on the outside of the bag. They can actually fit right through these little mesh holes in the bag. So there's tiny little worms that have come through the bag. You see there's one there. And so we're just gonna stick them on in the system. And we'll keep this newspaper because we're gonna use that in a moment as well. Inside of that dehydrated medium. Inside that medium to keep them dehydrated, really. That cocoa core, you can kind of see them squirming about. And so we're just gonna add the worms and all of their grow medium that they came with. Add them directly to the system. So I just like to turn it inside out. Make sure that we got everybody. You'll see them kind of getting very active almost like right away because, like I said, they've been dehydrated for a long period of time and they haven't had food or water, so they're going to get acclimated to the system and start kind of spreading out. And we are going to use this as a top cover and put it directly on top of the worms. So here we have the base for our worm bin. Set our feeder tray right on top of the base. Oh, let me rewind. This is the ladder. It's the worm ladder. It actually goes underneath this feeder tray, so I'm gonna pick this up. The worm ladder is basically for any worms that do happen to get through the mesh. Even though we put that newspaper on the bottom, there may be some worms that get through the bottom mesh and they end up in the collector area down here. So this little ladder is just to help facilitate them climbing back up. We'll set our tray down, but not like sopping wet. You don't want that. You just want it to be moist. So we're gonna share the love. All I'm gonna do right now is add this collection tray right underneath the spigot so that it can capture anything that comes through here. And like I mentioned, you want to leave the spigot in the open position so that it's forward so that air can properly circulate throughout the system. Now I can flip the tray back over and use it as our top for the worm farm. Put this back in position. I'll leave them alone for at least another 3 or 4 days, kind of let them get acclimated to the system, and then we'll check on them, see how they're doing, see if we need to add more food, or anything like that for them. One thing that I do want to mention about the worm factory and composting with worms are the things that you can put in here and things that you shouldn't. So worms do like their food chopped up kind of small. You don't have to, they will break it down, it just may take them a little bit longer. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, things like citrus are things that we won't be putting in here because they're very difficult to break down, and you don't want to put anything in here that may upset the worm's digestive system. The lid actually contains tips on things that you should or shouldn't put in here. There's food lists. It says all kinds of vegetables, all fruits, all kinds of starches, good fibers, and fiber can be anything like paper, cardboard, junk mail, whatever. You can throw all of those things in here. Coffee grinds and the filters, all of those kinds of things can come in here. And of course, if you have this outside and you want to put some of your yard trimmings and things like that in here, you can throw that stuff in here as well. You can even throw compost in here. You just want to make sure that you watch the moisture level and make sure it's not getting too wet, because that can create mold and all sorts of other problems inside your system, which can lead to more odors. So you want to be mindful of how moist it is. You don't want things dripping wet, you just want it to be moist. Also, as I mentioned with the temperature, ideally you want to be between 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's where that thermometer that came in the kit comes into play, and that will help determine if you got the worm factory at the right temperature. So stay along with us and we'll keep you updated. Be blessed. Hey, thank you for joining us here at United Acres. My name is Tony. If you like the video, hit that like button, share, and subscribe, and make sure you hit the notification bell so that you are notified every time that we post.